The wind howled like a wounded beast across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the first bitter snow of winter. Clara Whitmore pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she peered through the frost-etched window of her cabin. The kerosene lamp flickered on the rough-hewn table behind her, casting dancing shadows across the sparse room that had been her refuge and prison for the past 3 years. At 32, Clara had the weathered beauty of a woman who had learned to survive on her own terms. Her auburn hair, streaked prematurely with silver, was pulled back in a practical bun. Her hands, once soft from a comfortable life back east, now bore the calluses of splitting wood and tending to stubborn crops. She taught the handful of children in Mercy's Bend their letters and numbers 3 days a week, earning just enough to supplement what her small garden and chickens provided. The town itself lay 4 miles to the east, barely visible on clear days as a cluster of buildings huddled against the endless expanse of sage and grass. Tonight, with the storm building, it might as well have been on the far side of the moon. Clara was about to turn from the window when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the symphony of wind and snow. A rhythmic pounding, deliberate and desperate. Someone was at her door. Her heart quickened. Visitors were rare enough in good weather. In a storm like this, they were unheard of. She reached for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, checked that it was loaded, then approached the door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Please," came a man's voice, rough with cold. "My daughter, she's sick. We need shelter." Clara hesitated. The prairie had taught her caution. Drifters, outlaws, and desperate men were as much a part of the landscape as tumbleweeds and coyotes. But there was something in that voice, a raw edge of fear that only a parent would carry. She lifted the heavy bar and cracked the door open, keeping the rifle within easy reach. The wind immediately tried to tear the door from her grasp, bringing with it a swirl of snow and the sight of a tall figure hunched against the storm. In his arms was a bundle of blankets that could only be a child. "Please," the man said again, and now she could see his face, angular features made gaunt by cold, dark eyes that held both determination and desperation. Ice crystals clung to his black beard. "She's burning with fever. I saw your light." Clara made her decision. "Come in, quickly." The man stumbled across the threshold, and Clara slammed the door against the wind. In the sudden quiet of the cabin, she could hear the child's labored breathing. "Put her on the bed," Clara instructed, gesturing toward the narrow cot in the corner where she slept. "What's her name?" "Miriam," the man said, gently laying down his burden. As the blankets fell away, Clara saw a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years, her dark hair plastered to her head with sweat despite the cold. "I'm Elias. We were trying to reach Mercy's Bend when the storm hit." Clara was already moving, her hands sure as she felt the child's forehead. The fever was high, but not dangerous yet. "How long has she been like this?" "Since yesterday morning." Elias stood awkwardly by the bed, snow melting from his worn coat and forming puddles on the floor. "We've been traveling. I lost our supplies when our horse went lame." Clara noticed his clothes then, good quality despite being travel-worn, the kind of garments that spoke of money even when covered in trail dust. His boots were well made, his hands uncalloused. Not a farmer or a laborer then, but his eyes held a wariness she recognized, the look of someone running from something. "I need to bring her fever down," Clara said, pushing aside her observations. "There's a bucket by the stove. Fill it with snow. I'll need cool water." Elias moved to comply without question, and Clara appreciated his quick understanding. She retrieved her medicine box from the shelf, finding the willow bark tea she'd learned to make from an old Arapaho woman years ago. As she worked, preparing the tea in cool compresses, she was aware of Elias watching her. He'd shed his coat, revealing a gray wool shirt and dark trousers. Despite his disheveled state, there was something commanding about him, a sense of contained power that seemed at odds with his current circumstances. "You're very kind," he said quietly. "Not many would open their door on a night like this." "I'm a Christian woman," Clara replied, though that was only part of the truth. The larger part was that she remembered what it was like to be desperate and alone. "And I was a mother once." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw the question form in his eyes. But he didn't ask, and she was grateful. Miriam stirred as Clara placed a cool cloth on her forehead, her eyes fluttering open. They were the same dark shade as her father's. "Papa," she whispered. "I'm here, little bird." Elias moved to kneel beside the bed, his large hand engulfing his daughter's small one. The tenderness in the gesture made something tighten in Clara's chest. "This is Mrs. Whitmore," Clara supplied. "You're in my home. You're safe now." Miriam's gaze shifted to Clara, studying her with the unsettling directness children possessed. "You look tired," she said softly. "Despite everything." Clara found herself almost smiling. "So do you, child. Rest now." As the medicine began to take effect and Miriam drifted back to sleep, Clara became more aware of her unexpected guest's presence in her small space. Elias had moved to stand by the fire, his tall frame seeming to fill the cabin. "I should see to the firewood," he said, noticing her glance. "The storm will be long." "You don't need to." "Please." He met her eyes directly. "You've given us shelter. Let me help." There was pride there, she realized. Whatever circumstances had brought him to her door, he wasn't a man accustomed to taking charity. Clara nodded toward the door. "There's a wood pile under the lean-to out back, but be careful. It's easy to get turned around in weather like this." She watched him bundle back into his coat and venture into the storm, then turned her attention back to Miriam. The girl's breathing had eased, and her skin felt cooler to the touch. Clara allowed herself a moment of relief before practical concerns reasserted themselves. She had barely enough food for herself through the winter. 3 mouths would strain her supplies considerably, but she'd manage. She always had. Elias returned with an armload of split wood, snow swirling in with him. He stacked it neatly by the fireplace with practiced efficiency. "You've done that before," Clara observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've done many things." He paused, then added, "I worked for the railroad, lost my position a few weeks back. We've been drifting since, looking for a place to start over." It was a common enough story. The railroad companies were notorious for hiring and firing at will, bringing in workers for the dangerous job of laying track, then casting them aside when they were no longer needed. Yet something about his explanation rang hollow. His hands might be unmarked by labor, but he handled himself with the easy confidence of a man used to physical work. "And the child's mother?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her business. "Dead," Elias said simply. 2 years now." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Clara understood that weight all too well. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He nodded, accepting her sympathy without elaboration. "What about you? A woman alone, so far from town?" "By choice," Clara said, perhaps more sharply than intended. "I find my own company sufficient." If he noticed her defensive tone, he didn't comment. Instead, he moved to check on Miriam, adjusting the blankets around her with gentle hands. The evening deepened, the storm showing no signs of abating. Clara prepared a simple meal of cornbread and beans, painfully aware of how her stores diminished with each portion. Elias ate sparingly. She noticed, likely trying not to impose more than necessary. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Occasionally, one would rise to check on Miriam or add wood to the fire. It was oddly domestic, this quiet routine with a stranger, and Clara found herself both comforted and unsettled by it. "You said you were a teacher," Elias said eventually. "In town, 3 days a week. The children need their letters, even out here. Education is important," he agreed, and there was something in his tone that suggested more than casual agreement. "Miriam loves to read. She's already beyond what I can teach her." How long have you been traveling? He considered before answering. Too long. I thought I could find work in Cheyenne, but, he shrugged, the world has little use for men like me these days. Again, that false note. Clara studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. Everything about him spoke of authority. From the way he held himself to the educated cadence of his speech, this was no common laborer down on his luck. But she held her tongue. Everyone had secrets out here. God knew she had her own. The wind howled louder, rattling the windows in their frames. Clara rose to check the shutters, and Elias immediately stood to help. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same latch, and Clara jerked back as if burned. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to. It's nothing, Clara said quickly, disturbed by her reaction to the brief contact. It's been a long time since anyone. She didn't finish, but understanding flickered in his eyes. They secured the shutters in silence, the moment passing, but not forgotten. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to claim them both. Clara fashioned a pallet near the fire for Elias from spare blankets, achingly aware that it had been years since a man had slept under her roof. Thank you, he said again as he settled onto the makeshift bed. I know what this costs you, taking in strangers. If there's any way I can repay— Rest, Clara interrupted. We can speak of such things tomorrow. But as she lay on the floor beside Miriam's bed, wrapped in her own blanket, Clara wondered what tomorrow would bring. The storm showed no signs of breaking. These strangers would remain her guests until it passed, and already their presence was stirring things in her she'd thought long buried. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song across the empty plains, and Clara closed her eyes against the sound, against the memories it carried, against the dangerous warmth of knowing she was not, for this night at least, alone. Clara woke to the sound of wind still battering the cabin walls. Gray light filtered through the frost-covered windows, revealing that dawn had come. Though the storm showed no signs of relenting, she rose quietly from her makeshift bed on the floor, her back protesting the night spent on hardboards. Miriam still slept peacefully, her fever broken during the night. Elias was already awake, tending the fire with careful movements to avoid making noise. He looked up as Clara approached, and she was struck again by the intensity of his dark gaze. How did you sleep? He asked softly. Well enough, Clara lied, moving to check on Miriam. The child's forehead was cool now, her breathing even. Her fever's passed? Thanks to you. The gratitude in his voice was genuine. I didn't know what else to do. Clara busied herself with preparing breakfast, acutely aware of every spoonful of flour she used for biscuits. The storm's not breaking. You'll need to stay until it passes. We're already too much in your debt. Would you rather take her back out in this? Clara gestured toward the window, where snow swirled so thickly that the barn was invisible just yards away. Pride is a poor shield against weather like this. Something flickered across his face at the word pride, but he merely nodded. Then let me earn our keep. What needs doing? After a simple breakfast, Elias insisted on venturing out to check the animals. Clara watched from the window as he fought his way through the wind to the barn, returning sometime later covered in snow but triumphant. Your milk cow's fine, though not happy about the weather, he reported, stamping snow from his boots. But I noticed your chicken coop roof is sagging under the snow weight. If it collapses— Clara knew. The loss of her chickens would mean no eggs through winter, a hardship she could ill afford. I've been meaning to shore it up, but— I can fix it, Elias interrupted. If you have some spare lumber and nails— She studied him. His hands might be uncalloused, but he handled tools with easy familiarity. Within an hour, he had ventured back out with materials scavenged from the barn, working steadily despite the bitter wind. Miriam woke while her father was outside, looking around the cabin with curious eyes. Where's Papa? Fixing my chicken coop, Clara said, ladling warm porridge into a bowl. How are you feeling? Better. The girl accepted the food gratefully. You're the teacher lady, aren't you? Papa said we might find a teacher in the next town. I teach sometimes. Yes. Clara sat beside the bed. Do you like learning? Miriam's face lit up. Oh, yes, Papa teaches me, but he says I need a real teacher now. He says I'm too quick for him. There was that casual mention of education again, reinforcing Clara's suspicions about their background. What does your papa teach you? Numbers and letters and maps, Miriam said between spoonfuls. And French sometimes, though he says I won't need it out here. French. Clara filed that away with her other observations. Railroad laborers didn't typically speak French. Elias returned as they were talking, his face reddened by cold but satisfied. That should hold through the winter, he announced, then smiled at seeing his daughter sitting up. Feeling better, little bird? Mrs. Whitmore makes good porridge, Miriam informed him solemnly. Throughout the day, a strange domestic rhythm established itself. Elias split more wood than Clara had managed in a month, repaired a loose board in the floor she'd been stepping around for a year, and cleaned and oiled the hinges on her doors. He worked with quiet efficiency, never asking for direction, simply seeing what needed doing and doing it. Clara found herself stealing glances at him as she went about her own chores. There was something almost military in his bearing, a disciplined precision to his movements that spoke of rigid training. Yet, with Miriam, he was all gentleness, reading to her from Clara's small collection of books in a cultured voice that had never known the roughness of frontier life until recently. Your husband built well, Elias commented that afternoon, running his hand along a ceiling beam. This cabin will outlast most in the territory. Clara's hand stilled on the mending in her lap. He was particular about things lasting, she said carefully. Was. She met his gaze steadily. He died 3 years ago. Fire. Elias absorbed this information quietly. I'm sorry, that must have been... Yes, Clara cut him off, not wanting to revisit that particular nightmare. It was. They worked in companionable silence after that, but Clara noticed how Elias's eyes lingered on the cabin's details, the careful joinery, the neat shelves, the evidence of a life built with care and destroyed in minutes. As evening approached, they gathered around the fire again. Miriam had recovered enough to sit up, wrapped in blankets like a small empress holding court. She chattered about the books she'd read, the places she'd seen, revealing glimpses of a life that had included cities and comforts far removed from this rough cabin. Tell Mrs. Whitmore about the theater in Chicago. Papa, she urged. Elias's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was a long time ago, Miriam, but it was so beautiful. All the lights and the ladies in pretty dresses. The girl's enthusiasm dimmed as she caught her father's expression. I'm sorry, Papa. Nothing to be sorry for, he said gently. But Clara saw the pain that flickered across his features. After Miriam had been coaxed back to sleep, Clara and Elias sat by the fire again. The storm had finally begun to ease, though snow still fell steadily. She misses the life she knew, Clara observed. Children adapt, Elias said, staring into the flames. Better than adults, sometimes. And yet you chose to leave that life behind. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, sometimes life chooses for you. Sometimes staying in a place becomes more dangerous than leaving everything behind. Clara understood that kind of choice. Hadn't she made a similar one? Staying here in this isolation rather than returning east to family who would have taken her in? I came out here with my husband 8 years ago, she found herself saying. We were going to build something new. Something clean and honest, away from the factories and the smoke and the pressing crowds. She smiled bitterly. I suppose we did build something. It just didn't last. Nothing lasts, Elias said quietly. But sometimes what rises from the ashes is stronger than what came before. Their eyes met across the fire, and Clara felt something shift between them, an understanding. Perhaps between two people who had lost everything and were still trying to find reasons to continue. You speak like an educated man, she said carefully. A rueful smile touched his lips. Education is another thing that doesn't last out here. The railroad has no use for philosophy or literature, only strong backs and steady hands. And yet your hands show no sign of rail work. He looked down at them, long-fingered, unmarked by the brutal labor of driving spikes and hauling iron. No, he admitted. They don't. Clara waited, but he offered nothing more. After a moment, she rose to prepare for bed. Tomorrow the storm should break. You'll be able to move on. Yes, he agreed, though something in his voice suggested reluctance. We've imposed enough. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the dying wind and the quiet breathing of her guests. She thought about the careful way Elias had reinforced her chicken coop, the practiced ease with which he'd wielded hammer and saw. She thought about Miriam's mention of theaters and French lessons, about the way Elias held himself like a man used to giving orders rather than taking them. Most of all, she thought about the moment their hands had touched at the window shutter and the unexpected warmth that had flooded through her. It had been so long since she'd felt anything beyond the mere mechanics of survival. The realization that she could still feel, still want, was both thrilling and terrifying. In the morning, she woke to find Elias already outside, clearing paths through the fresh snow. The storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white that sparkled under the pale sun. Miriam was sitting up in bed, looking much recovered. "We should go, shouldn't we?" the girl said sadly. "Papa said we can't stay once the storm stops." Clara's heart clenched at the disappointment in the child's voice. "You're welcome here as long as you need," she said, meaning it despite her dwindling supplies. When Elias came in, his face was thoughtful. "The roads won't be passable for days," he reported. "Even if they were, I'm not sure Miriam should travel yet. She needs time to fully recover." Clara tried not to examine the relief that flooded through her. Then it settled. "You'll stay until she's stronger and the road's clear." "I can hunt," Elias offered. "Help replenish what we're eating. And there's other work. I noticed your barn door is hanging crooked, and the fence around your garden needs mending before spring." She should refuse. Every instinct warned her against letting these strangers further into her life. But Miriam's hopeful face and the quiet gratitude in Elias's eyes undid her resolve. "All right," she agreed. "But only if you let me teach Miriam while you're here. She shouldn't fall behind in her studies." The smile that transformed Elias's usually serious face took her breath away. "I think she'd like nothing better." As Clara prepared breakfast, she was aware of something she hadn't felt in 3 years, the warm possibility of not being alone. It terrified her almost as much as the growing attraction she felt for this mysterious man with gentle hands and too many secrets. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow-covered plains into a dazzling ocean of white. The storm had passed, but Clara suspected another kind of storm was just beginning. The days settled into a rhythm that felt dangerously like belonging. Each morning, Elias would rise before dawn to tend the fire and see to the animals, moving through Clara's space with a quiet consideration that both touched and unsettled her. Miriam, fully recovered now, would bounce from her bed eager for the day's lessons, her quick mind devouring everything Clara could teach her. It was during one of these lessons that Clara first glimpsed the depth of loss both father and daughter carried. "Can you tell me about adjectives?" Clara asked, watching Miriam carefully form letters on her slate. "Words that describe things." Miriam replied promptly, "Like beautiful, or vast, or—" her voice faltered, "or burning." Clara's chalk stilled on her own slate. "Burning. That's what Papa called the sky that night. When Mama—" Miriam's small face crumpled slightly before she caught herself, straightening with a dignity too mature for her 8 years. "I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to talk about it." "There's nothing to be sorry for," Clara said gently, her heart aching for the child. "Sometimes talking helps." Miriam glanced toward the window where her father was repairing the barn door. "Papa doesn't talk about it. He just gets quiet and looks far away. Sometimes I hear him walking at night when he thinks I'm sleeping." Clara knew those kinds of nights too well, the ones where memories prowled like wolves, and sleep offered no refuge. Your papa loves you very much. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad, they try to hide it to protect the ones they love. Were you sad when your husband died? The directness of the question took Clara's breath away. Yes, she said simply. I was very sad. But you're not sad now? Clara considered this. A month ago, she would have said she was resigned rather than sad. But now, I'm learning that sadness doesn't have to last forever. Sometimes new things grow in its place. Miriam smiled, the expression transforming her serious little face. Like flowers after winter? Exactly like that. That evening, as they shared supper, Clara found herself telling them about Thomas, how they'd met at a church social in Connecticut, how his dreams of western lands had infected her with the same adventurous spirit. He built this cabin with his own hands, she said, running her palm along the smooth surface of the table. Every joint, every beam, he was so proud of it. Said it would stand for 100 years. It's good work, Elias agreed, his appreciation genuine. He must have been a skilled carpenter. He was skilled at many things. Clara smiled at the memory. Too stubborn to admit when he was wrong, too proud to ask for help when he needed it. The night of the fire. She paused, gathering herself. There was a lightning strike. The barn caught first. He went to save the horses. She didn't need to finish. They could fill in the rest, the flames spreading faster than expected. The terrible choice between escape and salvage. The price of pride. I'm sorry, Elias said quietly. To lose someone that way. How did you lose your wife? The question emerged before Clara could stop it. Elias's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Miriam looked between the adults, sensing the sudden tension. There was an accident, he said finally. A train derailment outside Chicago. She was returning from visiting her sister. Something in the careful way he spoke suggested layers of untold story. Clara recognized the tone. It was how she spoke when skirting the edges of unbearable memory. The railroad can be dangerous, she offered, giving him an escape from further explanation. Yes, his voice was flat. It can. Later, after Miriam had been tucked into bed with a story, Elias stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Clara joined him, wrapping her shawl tight against the cold. I should apologize, she said. I shouldn't have asked about your wife. You shared your pain. It seemed only fair. He was quiet for a moment. Though I suspect you were more honest in your telling than I was in mine. Clara waited, having learned that silence often invited more truth than questions. She died because of choices I made, he said finally. Decisions that seemed right at the time, but... He shook his head. The railroad took her from us as surely as if I'd put her on those tracks myself. You blame yourself. Shouldn't I? His voice held a bitterness she hadn't heard before. I was the one who... He stopped abruptly. Forgive me. Some stories are better left untold. Clara touched his arm lightly. We all carry things we can't speak of. It doesn't make us liars, just human. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, and she became acutely aware of the contact. She should pull away, maintain the careful distance that had protected her these 3 years. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. Clara, he said, her name a question and a warning. I know, she whispered. I know all the reasons this is foolish. His hand covered hers, warm despite the cold. I have nothing to offer you. I'm a man running from shadows, dragging my daughter through a life she doesn't deserve. And I'm a woman hiding from life itself. Clara countered. Perhaps that makes us well matched in our foolishness. He turned to face her fully then, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. You deserve better than a man with secrets. And you deserve better than a woman afraid of her own heart. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then, with infinite gentleness, Elias lowered his head and kissed her. It was a careful kiss, tentative and questioning, as if they were both remembering how such things were done. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself sink into the warmth of it. the solid presence of him, the feeling of being connected to another's soul after so long in the wilderness of grief. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should go in," Clara said, though she made no move to do so. "Yes," Elias agreed, though his hand still rested against her cheek. A small sound from inside broke the spell, Miriam calling out in her sleep. Elias stepped back immediately, the father taking precedence over the man. "Go to her," Clara said softly. "I'll bank the fire." Inside, she moved through the familiar rituals of preparing for night, her lips still tingling from the kiss. She could hear Elias's low voice soothing his daughter, the creak of the bed as he sat beside her. This was dangerous territory she was entering. 3 weeks they'd been here now, and already the cabin felt different with their presence. Miriam's drawings decorated the walls. Elias's coat hung on the peg beside hers. Small things, but they represented a shifting of her carefully maintained solitude. As she lay down for the night, Clara admitted to herself what she'd been fighting since that first night. She was falling in love with them both, with serious little Miriam, who approached learning like a starving person approached bread, and with Elias, whose gentle hands and sad eyes spoke of depths she longed to explore. The next morning brought a new development. Miriam presented Clara with a carefully drawn picture. 3 figures standing before a cabin. Mountains in the background. "It's us," she explained unnecessarily. "You and me and Papa. I made you a family." Clara's throat tightened at the innocent words. Over the child's head, her eyes met Elias's. He looked stricken, as if his daughter had voiced something he'd been trying not to think. "It's beautiful," Clara managed. "May I keep it?" Miriam beamed. "I made it for you, so you won't forget us when we leave." Leave. The word dropped like a stone into Clara's heart. Of course they would leave. The roads were clear now, had been for days. Only the pretense of Miriam's recovery and the work Elias had taken on kept them here. That afternoon, as Clara and Miriam worked on arithmetic, the child suddenly said, "I wish we could stay here forever." "Nothing is forever," Clara said gently, echoing Elias's words from days before. "But couldn't we pretend, just for a while?" Looking into those earnest dark eyes, so like her father's. Clara found herself nodding. "Yes, sweetheart, we can pretend for a while." But even as she spoke, she knew their time was running short. Elias had been growing restless, checking the horizon more frequently, starting at unexpected sounds. Whatever he was running from wouldn't stay distant forever. That evening, as she watched them together, Elias helping Miriam with her letters, both heads bent over the slate in concentration, Clara made a decision. She would not ask them to stay. She would not burden them with her growing feelings, but she would cherish every remaining moment, storing them up against the lonely days ahead. "Clara?" Elias's voice drew her from her thoughts. "Miriam asked if she might call you something other than Mrs. Whitmore." Clara's heart skipped. "What would you like to call me?" Miriam bit her lip, suddenly shy. Could I call you Aunt Clara, like your family?" The word mother hung unspoken in the air. Clara saw the flash of pain in Elias's eyes, the recognition that his daughter was reaching for something she'd lost. "I would be honored," Clara said softly. Miriam's smile was radiant as she threw her arms around Clara's neck, over the child's shoulder. Clara saw Elias watching them with an expression of such longing that it took her breath away. Later, as Miriam slept and they sat by the dying fire, Elias said quietly, "She's getting attached. Is that so terrible?" "Yes." The word was stark. "Because we can't stay, and leaving will break her heart all over again." "Then why did you kiss me?" The question slipped out, raw with her own growing pain. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I'm selfish. Because for a moment, I let myself imagine a different life, one where I could court you properly, where Miriam could grow up in one place, where the past couldn't reach us." "The past always reaches us," Clara said. "But sometimes we can choose whether it defines us." He smiled sadly. spoken like someone whose past holds grief but not danger. The words chilled her. "Are you in danger?" is Miriam. Not immediate danger, but there are people who would be very interested to know where I am, what I'm doing. People from the railroad. He hesitated, then nodded. Among others. Clara absorbed this. Another piece of the puzzle that was Elias Morgan, an educated man with soft hands and hard eyes, a father running from something that put lines of worry in his face, a railroad man who spoke of the railroad with bitter hatred. "Whatever you're running from," she said carefully, "you're safe here." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "No one is safe around me. Clara, that's what I'm trying to tell you." But his thumb stroked across her knuckles, belying his words of warning. And Clara, who had been safe and alone for 3 years, found she no longer valued safety quite so highly as she once had. The stranger arrived on a Thursday morning, riding a fine bay horse that looked out of place against the rough landscape. Clara was in the garden, clearing snow from around the cold frames, when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. Elias was in the barn, and Miriam was inside practicing her letters. The man who dismounted at her gate was well dressed despite the dust of travel, his coat expensive wool and his boots polished beneath the trail dirt. He had the look of a city man, with pale skin and soft features that spoke of indoor work. "Mrs. Whitmore?" He touched his hat politely. "My name is James Harrison. I'm looking for someone, and I was told in town you might have seen him." Clara's hands tightened on the hoe she carried, but she kept her expression neutral. "We're far from the main roads here. Mr. Harrison, not many people pass by." This man would be traveling with a young girl, tall, dark hair, educated manner of speaking. Harrison's eyes were sharp as they scanned the homestead. "Goes by the name of Elias. That's not much of a description. Could be half the men in Wyoming territory." Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This particular man would stand out. He's distinctive, used to giving orders rather than taking them." He paused meaningfully. "There's a substantial reward for information leading to his whereabouts." "I'm not interested in rewards. Mr. Harrison." "No, a woman alone, working land like this. Surely you could use the money." There was something insulting in his tone, a casual dismissal of her capability that set Clara's teeth on edge. "I manage well enough." Harrison's gaze traveled over the homestead again, lingering on the recently repaired chicken coop, the freshly mended fence. "Recent improvements. I see. You must have hired help." "I'm handy with tools when I need to be." "Of course." He clearly didn't believe her. "Well, if you should happen to see this man, Elias Morgan is his full name. I'm staying at the hotel in Mercy's Bend. The railroad company is very anxious to locate him." Clara forced herself to remain calm. What's he wanted for? "That's company business." Harrison's smile turned colder. "But I will say that Mr. Morgan has something that doesn't belong to him. Something of considerable value." He mounted his horse with the awkwardness of a man more accustomed to carriages than saddles. "Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. Do think about that reward." Clara watched him ride away, her heart hammering. She waited until he was well out of sight before hurrying to the barn. Elias looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression shifting immediately when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "A man was just here, James Harrison. He's looking for you." The color drained from Elias's face. He set down the harness with careful deliberation. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but he knew your name, your full name. And he said—" She hesitated. "He said you have something that doesn't belong to you." Elias's laugh was bitter. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking older. "We need to leave. Tonight." "Papa?" Miriam appeared in the barn doorway, her face anxious. "Are we running again?" The defeat in the child's voice broke Clara's heart. Elias crossed to his daughter, kneeling to meet her eyes. "I'm afraid so, little bird." "But I don't want to leave Aunt Clara." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "You promised we could stay longer." I know, sweetheart, I know, but— No! Miriam pulled away from him, running to Clara instead. Please don't make us go, please! Clara held the sobbing child, meeting Elias's tortured gaze over her head. Perhaps you should tell me the truth. All of it. You don't want to know. I think I have a right to decide that for myself. They returned to the cabin, Miriam clinging to Clara's hand. Once inside, Elias paced the small space like a caged animal while Clara settled Miriam with a book. Her name wasn't Morgan. He began finally. It was Donnelly, Catherine Donnelly. Her father owned one of the smaller railroad companies out of Chicago. When we married, I took a position with the company. I was good at it. Organization, logistics, seeing the bigger picture. His smile was self-mocking. I rose quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. Clara waited, sensing the difficult part approaching. After Catherine died, her father blamed me, said if I hadn't pushed for faster expansion, hadn't cut certain corners to beat the competition. He stopped, swallowed hard. The train that derailed was one I had personally approved for service despite concerns about the track quality on that stretch. 23 people died, including my wife. Oh, Elias. Donnelly couldn't prosecute me. I'd done nothing illegal, only unethical, but he could make my life hell. And he did. Blackballed me from every railroad company. Used his influence to turn business associates against me. I tried to stick it out, for Miriam's sake, but then— He moved to the window, checking the horizon. Then I discovered discrepancies in the company books. Donnelly had been skimming from contracts, bribing officials, falsifying safety reports. The very things he accused me of, he'd been doing for years. You took evidence, Clara said, understanding dawning. Copies of everything. Enough to destroy him and half the railroad commission. I thought it would be insurance, protection for Miriam and me. Instead, it painted a target on our backs. This Harrison? One of Donnelly's men. There have been others. We've been running for months, staying ahead of them, but— He turned back to her. I'm tired. Clara, and Miriam deserves better than this constant flight. Clara rose and went to him, taking his hands in hers. They were trembling slightly. Why didn't you go to the authorities? With evidence I stole? Against one of the most powerful men in Chicago? Who would believe me? And even if they did, the scandal would destroy any chance Miriam has for a normal life. So you run, so we run. He gripped her hands tighter. And now I've brought this danger to your door. Harrison will be back. You know, he's not the type to give up easily. Clara thought of the cold-eyed man who'd stood at her gate, assessing her property like he was calculating its worth. Let him come. Clara, you don't understand. No, you don't understand. She pulled her hands free, anger rising. You think I'm some fragile flower who needs protecting? I've survived 3 years alone out here. I've faced down wolves and claimed jumpers and storms that would send your Mr. Harrison running back to Chicago. I'm not afraid of him. You should be. Well, I'm not. She crossed her arms. What I am is angry. Angry that you lied to me? Angry that you let me fall in— She stopped abruptly. Fall in love? Elias finished softly. Is that what's happened? Clara. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. It doesn't matter now. It matters more than anything. He moved behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I don't lie awake at night cursing myself for bringing trouble to the only peace we've known in months? Then why did you stay so long? Because I'm weak. His voice was raw. Because watching you with Miriam, seeing this place come alive with your presence, feeling like I had a home again, I let myself be weak. Clara turned to face him, and the anguish in his eyes undid her anger. Love isn't weakness, Elias. It is when it puts others in danger. From across the room, Miriam's small voice interrupted. Are you and Aunt Clara fighting? They both turned to find her watching them with worried eyes, her book forgotten. No, sweetheart, Clara said, going to her. We're just trying to figure out what's best. What's best is staying here. Miriam said firmly. "This is home now." Clara's heart broke a little more. She gathered the girl into her arms, meeting Elias's gaze over her head. "Sometimes home isn't a place, darling. Sometimes it's the people we're with." "Then you could come with us," Miriam said hopefully. "We could be home together, anywhere." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Clara saw the war play out across Elias's features, hope battling with fear, desire with duty. "Miriam," he began, but Clara interrupted. "We need to think practically." She said, "Harrison knows you're in the area now. He'll check every homestead, every town. You need to disappear, and quickly. We'll leave tonight." "No." Clara's mind was working rapidly. "That's what he'll expect. You leave tonight, he'll pick up your trail by morning. But if you stay put, let him search the obvious places first. You're suggesting we hide here. I'm suggesting you hide in plain sight. Harrison saw a woman alone. That's what he expects to see." She took a breath. "Stay, but as my hired hand and his daughter, if he comes back, we brazen it out." "Clara, that's too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now," she cut him off. "At least here you have a chance. And She stopped, then forced herself to continue. "I have a chance to help the people I've come to care about." Elias crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "I can't ask this of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, as if trying to pour all his gratitude and fear and love into the contact. Miriam giggled, breaking the tension, and they pulled apart. "So we're staying?" the girl asked hopefully. "For now," Elias said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "God help us. For now." That evening, they prepared for the possibility of Harrison's return. Elias moved his few possessions to the barn, making it appear he slept there as a hired hand would. They rehearsed their story. He was a drifter Clara had hired for winter work, simple and unremarkable. As night fell, Clara found herself standing in the doorway between 2 worlds, behind her, in the warm cabin. Miriam practiced her letters while humming softly. Before her, in the barn, Elias prepared his rifle with the efficiency of a man who'd faced danger before. She'd spent 3 years in safety and solitude. Now she was harboring fugitives, lying to dangerous men, risking everything for people she'd known barely a month. And yet, watching Miriam's concentrated expression, hearing Elias's movements in the barn, Clara felt more alive than she had since the night she'd lost Thomas. Perhaps this was what love did, made you foolish and brave in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, she had a family again, even if it was built on lies and shadowed by danger. It was enough. It had to be. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the weight of Elias's departure. Clara stood at her window, watching him load their meager possessions onto the borrowed wagon. His movements were efficient but reluctant. Each item packed a small goodbye. Miriam sat at the table, refusing breakfast, her small face set in lines of misery that made her look older than her 8 years. She hadn't spoken since Elias had told her they were leaving after all, that staying would only bring danger to Aunt Clara. "You need to eat something," Clara said gently, sitting beside her. "I'm not hungry." Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. "Will we ever see you again?" Clara's throat tightened. How could she promise something she didn't know? "I hope so, sweetheart." "Papa says hope isn't enough sometimes." The girl's fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "He says we have to be practical. Your papa is trying to protect you." "I'm tired of being protected." The words burst out with surprising vehemence. "I'm tired of running and hiding and leaving people behind. Mama's gone, and now you'll be gone too. And someday, Papa will be gone and I'll be all alone." Clara pulled the child into her arms, feeling the small bodies shake with suppressed sobs. "Oh, darling, your papa isn't going anywhere. He loves you more than anything in this world. He loved Mama too, and she still went away." There was no answer to that kind of logic, born of grief too large for a child to carry. Clara held her tighter, pressing kisses to her dark hair. wishing she had words to make it better. Elias entered then, his face drawn with the weight of the night's decision. He'd barely slept. Clara knew, because she'd lain awake listening to his restless movements in the barn. "The wagon's ready," he said quietly. Miriam pulled away from Clara and ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Please, Papa, please don't make us go." Something broke in Elias's expression. He lifted his daughter, holding her close. "I'm sorry, little bird, I'm so sorry." Clara rose, unable to watch their pain without acting. "This is foolish," she said abruptly. "Harrison has no proof you were here. For all he knows, you've already moved on to California or back east. Why run when running itself will mark you as guilty? Because staying puts you at risk. I've been at risk every day for 3 years. Clara countered. "Living alone, managing this place, dealing with whoever rides up to my door. This is no different." "It's entirely different." Elias set Miriam down gently. "These men won't stop at threats or intimidation. Donnelly wants those documents back, and he wants me silenced. Anyone who helps me becomes a target." "Then give them back," Clara said. "The documents, whatever you took, give them back and end this." Elias's laugh was hollow. "And trust Donnelly's word that he'll leave us alone after? The man whose negligence killed my wife, who destroyed my reputation, who would see his own granddaughter homeless rather than admit his crimes. Then use them. Stop running and fight back." "With what authority? I'm nobody now. Clara, just another drifter with a sad story." He moved to the window, checking the horizon as had become his habit. "The best I can do is keep Miriam safe and hope Donnelly eventually gives up or dies." Clara felt her temper rising. "So you'll spend your life looking over your shoulder? You'll raise Miriam in constant fear? What would you have me do?" He turned on her, his own frustration breaking through. "March into a courthouse with stolen evidence and hope someone listens before Donnelly's men put a bullet in me? I'd have you stop being a coward." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and shocking. Miriam made a small sound of distress, but Clara couldn't take them back. Elias's face went very still. "Is that what you think I am? I think you're so wrapped up in guilt over your wife's death that you've forgotten how to live," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I think you're using this flight as punishment, dragging Miriam along because you believe you don't deserve happiness or peace. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I've watched you these past weeks. Elias, I've seen how you look at the life you could have here, then pull back as if touching it would contaminate it. You're not protecting us. You're protecting yourself from the possibility of loss." His hands clenched at his sides. "You're right. I am a coward. Coward enough to want one more night in your arms. Selfish enough to stay when I knew it would make leaving harder. But not coward enough to watch you die from my mistakes. That's not your choice to make." "Yes, it is." His voice was quiet now, final. "Just as it was my choice to approve that train, to put profit over safety, to believe I was too smart to fail. Catherine died because of my arrogance. I won't have your death on my conscience, too." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "So instead you'll leave us both with broken hearts? That's your solution. Broken hearts heal. Death is permanent." "Papa?" Miriam's small voice interrupted. "Are you and Aunt Clara saying goodbye?" They both turned to look at her. This child who'd lost so much already. Clara saw her own pain reflected in Elias's eyes, the terrible weight of adult choices pressing down on them both. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said gently. "We're saying goodbye." "I don't want to." Miriam's chin lifted stubbornly. "I won't say it." "Miriam." "No, Papa. If I don't say goodbye, then it's not real. We're just going on a trip, and we'll come back, and Aunt Clara will be here waiting for us." Her voice broke on the last words. "She'll be here, won't she, even if we're gone a long time?" Clara knelt before the girl, taking her small hands. "I'll always be here, darling. This is my home, and you—" She had to stop, swallow hard. "You'll always have a place here, both of you. Always." Miriam threw her arms around Clara's neck, sobbing now. Over the child's head. Clara met Elias's gaze. He looked destroyed. This strong man brought low by his daughter's grief and his own impossible choices. A sound from outside made them all freeze, hoofbeats approaching fast. Elias moved swiftly to the window, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "It's Samuel Turner from town," he said after a moment, relaxing slightly. Clara recognized the name. Turner ran the general store. She gently disentangled herself from Miriam and went to the door. Turner was dismounting, his usually cheerful face grave. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Sorry to intrude so early." "What brings you out here?" "Mr. Turner." "News from town. That fellow who was asking after folks yesterday. Harrison? He got himself into some trouble last night." Clara's heart skipped. "What kind of trouble?" "The permanent kind. I'm afraid. Found him dead in his hotel room this morning. Looks like his heart gave out. Doc Morrison says, though there's some as wonder about it, man seemed healthy enough yesterday." Clara heard Elias's sharp intake of breath behind her. "That's unfortunate," she managed. "Indeed. Thing is, before he died, he was showing a photograph around town. Man with a little girl, offering good money for information." Turner's eyes flicked past Clara to where Elias stood in the shadows. Some folks got to thinking maybe they'd seen such a pair, but with Harrison dead, well, he shrugged. "Seems there's no one to pay that reward now." The message was clear. Turner knew, and likely others did too, but the town was choosing to protect them. "I appreciate you letting me know," Clara said carefully. Turner touched his hat, just being neighborly. "Oh, and Mrs. Whitmore. If your hired hand there needs work past the winter, Frank Morrison's looking for someone to help with his freight business. Steady work for a steady man." He mounted up and rode away, leaving them in stunned silence. "He's dead," Miriam said wonderingly. "The bad man is dead." "One of them," Elias corrected, though his voice held a note of hope it hadn't before. "There will be others." "Maybe not," Clara said slowly. "If Harrison died before reporting back, Donnelly won't know where you are, and if the town is willing to stay quiet, it's still too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous." Clara repeated her words from the night before. "But now you have time. Time to think, to plan, maybe even to fight back properly." Elias was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with possibilities. "Finally," he said. "Even if we stayed, things couldn't be what they've been. I'd have to be just your hired hand. Keep distance between us." "I know. Clara." He stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "I can't court you properly. Can't offer you marriage or even open acknowledgement. Is that really what you want? To care for a man who can't claim you?" She met his gaze steadily. "I've been claimed once. Had the ring and the vows and the proper courtship. It all burned to ash in a single night." She reached up to touch his face. "I'd rather have whatever you can give me than nothing at all." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "You deserve so much more. What I deserve and what I want aren't always the same thing." "Clara, Aunt Clara," Miriam interrupted excitedly. "Does this mean we can unpack? Can I put my books back on the shelf?" They looked down at her hopeful face, then at each other. Clara saw the moment Elias surrendered, the rigid control he'd held for so long finally cracking. "Yes," he said roughly. "Yes, little bird. We can unpack." Miriam's squeal of joy filled the cabin. She ran outside to begin bringing things back in, leaving Clara and Elias alone. "I'm still a danger to you," he said quietly. "I know. This could end badly. Probably will. I know that too." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she might disappear. "I don't deserve this second chance. None of us deserve the chances we get." Clara murmured against his chest. "We just have to be brave enough to take them." They stood there, holding each other in the morning light, while outside Miriam sang as she unpacked their few possessions. It wasn't a promise of forever. They both knew better than that now. But it was a promise of today, and tomorrow, and whatever days they could steal from fate. Sometimes, Clara thought, that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. The accident happened on a clear morning in early March, when the last of winter's grip was finally loosening. Clara was in the schoolhouse in town, teaching the handful of local children their arithmetic, when young Tom Morrison burst through the door. "Mrs. Whitmore, come quick. There's been an accident at the railroad cut." Clara's blood turned to ice. The railroad construction had reached within 5 miles of Mercy's Bend, and Elias had taken work there 3 days a week, both for the wages and to hear any news that might filter down about Donnelly's search for him. "What kind of accident?" she asked, already reaching for her shawl. "Explosion in the cut. They're bringing the hurt men to Doc Morrison's now." Clara dismissed the children and ran. The main street was chaos wagons arriving with injured workers, women gathering with worried faces, men shouting orders. She pushed through the crowd to the doctor's office, her heart hammering. "Where is he?" she demanded of the first person she saw. "Frank Morrison, the doctor's son. Who are you looking for?" "Elias Morgan." The name felt strange on her tongue after months of calling him simply her hired hand in public. Frank's face was grim. "He's inside. He was closest to the blast. Mrs. Whitmore, he's bad." Clara shoved past him into the makeshift hospital. The smell hit her first, blood and gunpowder and the sharp scent of chloroform. Men lay on every available surface, groaning or ominously quiet. She found Elias in the back room, and her knees nearly buckled. His left side was a mess of blood and torn flesh. Doc Morrison worked over him with focused intensity, his instruments moving in precise patterns. Elias was unconscious, his face gray beneath the dirt and blood. "How bad?" Clara asked. Surprised, her voice remained steady. "Bad enough," Morrison said without looking up. "Shrapnel tore him up pretty good, lost a lot of blood. If he makes it through the night..." He didn't finish the sentence. Clara rolled up her sleeves. "What do you need me to do?" For the next hours, she worked beside the doctor, holding Elias still when he stirred, cleaning wounds, changing bandages. Other women came to help with other patients, but Clara never left Elias's side. As evening fell, Morrison finally stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've done what I can. Now we wait. I'm staying. Figured you would." The doctor studied her with knowing eyes. "He's more than just a hired hand to you, isn't he?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Morrison nodded slowly. "Harrison was asking questions about a man and child before he died, offering good money for information." Clara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. "Funny thing," Morrison continued. "Nobody seemed to remember seeing anyone matching that description. Town's got a poor memory when it wants to." "What are you saying, doctor?" "I'm saying that man saved 3 others today. Pushed them clear when he saw the blast coming. That's the kind of man worth protecting. Wouldn't you say?" Clara felt tears burn her eyes. Yes, it is." Morrison squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll have someone bring the girl. She should be here." Miriam arrived within the hour, Frank Morrison having fetched her from the cabin. Her face was white with fear as she saw her father's still form. "Is he going to die?" she whispered. "Not if I can help it," Clara said fiercely, pulling the girl close. "Your papa is strong. He's survived worse than this." They kept vigil through the night. Clara bathed Elias's fevered face, held his hand, whispered prayers and pleas and promises. Miriam curled up in a chair, refusing to leave, her eyes never leaving her father. Near dawn, Elias stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found Clara's face. "Clara?" His voice was a rasp. "I'm here." She squeezed his hand. "Miriam's here too. You're going to be all right. The others, the men, safe. You saved them." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You foolish, brave man. You nearly got yourself killed." "Worth it," he murmured. "Clara, if something happens, nothing's going to happen. You're going to get well, and we're going to go home, and you're going to stop talking nonsense." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Bossy woman." "Papa!" Miriam scrambled onto the bed, careful of his injuries. "You scared me." "Sorry, little bird." He lifted his good hand to touch her hair. "I'm all right now." Over the next days, the town rallied around them. Women brought food. Men offered to help with Clara's chores. Children made drawings for Miriam to cheer her. It was then that Clara truly understood. They had been accepted. Whatever questions anyone had about Elias's past, his actions had answered them. But the revelation that changed everything came from an unexpected source. A week after the accident, as Elias was finally able to sit up, a stranger arrived in town. Unlike Harrison, this man wore the rough clothes of a working reporter, ink stains on his fingers and a notebook always in hand. He introduced himself as Matthew Coleman from the Chicago Tribune. "I'm investigating a series of stories about railroad corruption," he explained when he came to Doc Morrison's office. "I heard there was an accident here. Wanted to see if it was related to the safety violations I've been tracking." Clara tensed, but Coleman's next words shocked her. "I'm particularly interested in any connections to Donnelly Railroad. Word is they've been cutting corners on blast procedures, bribing inspectors. Already had 2 accidents they've covered up." Elias, propped up in bed, went very still. "What do you know about Donnelly?" Coleman studied him shrewdly. "I know he's a dangerous man who's gotten rich off other people's misery. I know he had a son-in-law who disappeared with evidence of his crimes. And I know there are people in Chicago who'd very much like to see that evidence come to light." "What people?" "Reform politicians, federal investigators, families of victims from accidents Donnelly covered up." Coleman leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, yes, I know who you are. What you have could save lives, stop Donnelly from hurting anyone else." Clara saw the war play out on Elias's face, fear fighting with duty, the desire to protect warring with the need for justice. "They'll come after my daughter," he said finally. "They already are. Donnelly's hired 3 different agencies to find you. It's only a matter of time." Coleman's voice gentled. "But if the story breaks, if the evidence goes public, you become untouchable. Hard to disappear a man the whole country's reading about." "You're asking me to trust you." "I'm asking you to trust the truth," Coleman corrected. "And maybe trust that doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous, is what men like you do. Heard you prove that pretty well in that railroad cut." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. "What do you think?" She took his hand. "I think running hasn't kept you safe. I think Miriam deserves a life without fear. And I think—" She took a breath. "I think the man I love wouldn't be able to live with himself if more people died when he could have prevented it." It was the first time she'd said the word love aloud. Elias's fingers tightened on hers. "The documents are hidden at the cabin," he said to Coleman. "Under the floorboards near the stove. Take them. Use them. End this." Coleman stood, respect clear in his eyes. "You're doing the right thing. Mr. Morgan, I'll make sure the story's told properly, and I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to go through proper channels first, that you only took the evidence when Donnelly tried to silence you." After he left, Miriam climbed carefully onto the bed between Clara and her father. "Does this mean we don't have to run anymore?" "Maybe," Elias said cautiously. "We'll have to wait and see what happens." "I hope we can stay," Miriam said sleepily. "I like having a home." Clara met Elias's eyes over the child's head. "So do I," she said softly. The next weeks were tense. Coleman published his first story, then another. Each revelation building on the last, other papers picked up the scandal. Federal investigators arrived in Chicago. Donnelly's empire began to crumble. Through it all, Clara cared for Elias as he healed. The town closed ranks around them, protective of their own. When 2 more of Donnelly's men arrived, asking questions, they were met with stony silence and Sheriff Watson's suggestion that they move along. Finally, a telegram arrived. Coleman's message was brief but life-changing. "Donnelly arrested. Federal charges filed. You're free." Clara was hanging laundry when Elias brought her the news. He was still moving carefully. His injuries not fully healed, but his face held a lightness she'd never seen before. "It's over," he said simply. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding. "Truly? Truly." He pulled her into his arms. mindful of his healing ribs. "Clara, we can have a real life now. I can court you properly. Give you and Miriam the life you deserve." "Elias Morgan," she interrupted. "If you think I've waited all this time for proper courtship, you're a fool." He laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Then what do you want? You, Miriam, this life we've built." She pulled back to look at him. "I don't need grand gestures or society approval. I just need to know that when I wake each morning, you'll be there, that we'll face whatever comes together." "Always," he promised. "No more running, no more secrets, just us." From the cabin door, Miriam watched them with a smile that could have lit the whole territory. "Does this mean I can call you Mama now?" she asked Clara hopefully. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "If you'd like to." "I'd like to very much," Miriam said, running to join their embrace. They stood there in the yard, the three of them holding tight to each other, while around them the Wyoming spring burst into bloom. The road to this moment had been dark and dangerous, filled with loss and fear and uncertainty. But sometimes, Clara thought, the hardest roads led to the most beautiful destinations. They were home, they were family, they were free. The evening sun cast long shadows across the porch as Clara finished setting down the supper dishes. 3 weeks had passed since Coleman's telegram, and life had settled into a new rhythm, one without the constant vigilance that had marked their months together. Yet tonight, she sensed a restlessness in Elias, a tension that reminded her of their early days. He stood at the porch rail, staring out at the vast Wyoming sky, his healing injuries making his posture slightly stiff. Miriam was in the barn, tending to an orphaned calf she'd adopted, leaving them alone with the weight of unspoken words. "You've been quiet all day," Clara said, joining him at the rail. He glanced at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "I've been thinking about Catherine." Clara's heart tightened, but she kept her voice gentle. "Tell me." "Today would have been our anniversary. 10 years. His hands gripped the rail. "I used to mark the day with guilt. You know, another year of surviving when she didn't. Another year of failing her. And now. He turned to face her fully. "Now I'm standing here with you, feeling things I thought I'd never feel again. And the guilt is different. Like I'm betraying her memory by being happy." Clara reached for his hand. "Is that what you think love is? A finite resource that runs out?" "I loved her, Clara, truly and deeply. I know you did, just as I loved Thomas." She squeezed his fingers. "But they're gone, Elias. And we're here. Does it honor them to live only half a life?" He was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice thick with emotion. "She would have liked you, Catherine. She had the same strength, the same way of seeing straight through to the heart of things. Tell me about her. Not about how she died. Tell me how she lived." So he did. Standing there in the fading light, Elias painted a picture of a woman who loved music and laughter, who challenged him at every turn, who gave him Miriam and with her, a reason to become a better man. "She made me promise," he said eventually. "When she knew she was dying, in those last moments after they pulled her from the wreckage, she made me promise to find happiness again, to give Miriam a real mother someday." His voice broke. "I was so angry. How could she ask that of me when she was leaving?" "Because she loved you," Clara said simply. "Because that's what love does. It wants joy for the beloved, even in absence." Elias pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were an anchor in a storm. "I need to tell you the whole truth, about the accident, about my responsibility." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You deserve to know exactly who you're choosing." They sat on the porch steps, and Elias spoke of things he'd never told anyone, how he'd pushed for faster completion of the northern route, knowing the track bed wasn't properly settled, how he'd signed off on the inspection reports without riding the line himself, how Catherine had taken that particular train only because he'd assured her it was safe. 23 people died because I was arrogant," he said. "Because I thought I was too smart, too careful to make mistakes. Catherine died believing in my competence." Clara absorbed this, understanding finally the depth of his self-punishment. And the documents you took proved Donnelly had been doing the same thing for years, worse even, but that doesn't absolve me. He looked at her directly. Can you love a man with that kind of blood on his hands? Clara thought of her own guilt, the weight she carried. The fire that killed Thomas. It started because I left a lamp burning in the barn. I was tired, careless. I've never told anyone that. Elias's eyes widened in understanding. We all carry our failures. Clara continued. The question is whether we let them define us or teach us. She touched his face. The man who pushed those workers clear of the blast, who risked everything to stop Donnelly from hurting others. That's who you are now. That's who I love. Clara. His voice was rough with emotion. I don't need a perfect man. Elias, I need a real one. Someone who understands loss and chooses love anyway. Someone who makes mistakes and tries to make them right. She smiled through her tears. Besides, Miriam needs parents who understand that being human means being flawed. Parents, he repeated softly. Is that what we are? Isn't it? We've been dancing around it for months, but that child already calls me Mama. And you? She took a breath. You're already more of a husband to me than many men with rings and papers. He stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. Then let's make it real. Marry me, Clara. Not someday when I've proven myself worthy. But now, let me give you my name, such as it is. Let me wake every morning knowing you chose me, ghosts and all. Clara's heart raced. Elias, I know I'm doing this badly. I have no ring, no proper proposal prepared. But standing here, telling you my worst truths, and having you still look at me with love. He cupped her face in his hands. I don't want to waste another day pretending we're anything other than what we are. A family. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, of course yes. He kissed her then, deep and tender, pouring into it all the words they'd held back for so long. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Papa, Mama, Clara, Miriam's voice rang across the yard. Come see, the calf is walking better. They smiled at each other, the moment both broken and made perfect by the interruption. We should tell her, Clara said. She'll want to plan everything. Elias warned. That child has opinions about flowers I didn't know existed. They found Miriam in the barn, indeed fussing over the calf. When they told her the news, her shriek of joy probably reached town. A real wedding, with a dress and flowers and cake. She bounced on her toes. Oh, Papa, can we have it in the church? And can I wear my blue dress? And can Mr. and Mrs. Morrison come and breathe, little bird? Elias laughed. We'll plan it all, I promise. That night, after Miriam had finally been coaxed to bed still chattering about wedding plans, Clara and Elias sat by the fire. But this time, there was no careful distance between them, no pretense of propriety. She curled against him on the small settee, his arm around her shoulders. I want to show you something, he said suddenly. He retrieved a small leather pouch from his jacket and handed it to her. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. It was Catherine's mother's, he explained. The only valuable thing I kept when we ran. I couldn't sell it, couldn't leave it behind. It felt like, he paused, like accepting we might have a future worth saving it for. Clara held the ring up to the firelight, seeing not possession but possibility. It's beautiful. Catherine would want you to have it. She'd want Miriam to see it worn with joy again. He took it from her gently, then slid from the settee to kneel before her. Clara Whitmore, you've given us shelter, hope, and home. Will you let me give you my name, my devotion, and whatever years the good Lord grants us? Only if you promise to stop kneeling on your bad side. Clara said, tugging him back up. You'll undo all Doc Morrison's work. He laughed, settling beside her again and sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I love you, he said simply, not as a replacement or a second choice, but as yourself. Clara, my Clara, and I love you, she replied. My complicated, stubborn, wonderful Elias. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die to embers. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and full of stars. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other across the plains. But inside the small cabin, there was warmth and light and the quiet breathing of a child who would wake tomorrow to find her dearest wish coming true. "No more guilt," Clara said eventually. "We've both paid our debts to the past. From now on, we build forward." "Together," Elias agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Always together." As the last log collapsed in a shower of sparks, they rose and prepared for bed, still in separate spaces for propriety's sake, though not for much longer. At her bedroom door, Elias caught her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing who I could be instead of who I was, for being brave enough to love us both." "Thank you," she replied, "for staying, for choosing hope over fear." They parted reluctantly, each to their own rest, but Clara lay awake for a long time, turning the ring on her finger, marveling at how a life could change. 6 months ago, she'd been frozen in grief and solitude. Now she had a daughter who filled the cabin with laughter, a man whose love was all the deeper for being hard-won, and a future bright with possibility. The past would always be part of them. Thomas and Catherine, the fire and the train, the choices made and unmade. But tonight, for the first time in years, the past felt like foundation rather than prison. Tomorrow they would begin planning a wedding. Tomorrow Miriam would undoubtedly have 100 questions and suggestions. Tomorrow the work of building a life together would continue. But tonight, Clara Whitmore, soon to be Clara Morgan, closed her eyes and smiled, her heart finally, fully at peace. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a kind of pristine blue sky that made the Wyoming plains seem endless. Clara stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple ivory dress Mrs. Morrison had helped her alter. It had been her mother's, packed away in tissue these many years, waiting for a moment she'd thought would never come again. "Mama Clara, you look beautiful." Miriam burst through the door, already dressed in her blue frock with white ribbons. "Papa's going to cry when he sees you. He always gets that soft look when he watches you, but today," she sighed dramatically, "today he might just faint dead away." Clara laughed, smoothing the child's dark hair. "Your papa is made of sterner stuff than that, though I wouldn't mind seeing him a little overcome." A year had passed since that desperate night when a stranger sought shelter from a storm. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life. Elias had built an addition, a proper bedroom for Miriam, and a small study where he worked on correspondence for Frank Morrison's freight business. The old fear of discovery was gone, replaced by the ordinary concerns of a family making their way in the world. "The wagon's ready." Sarah Morrison called from the main room. The doctor's wife had become a dear friend, one of many connections that now tied them firmly to the community of Mercy's Bend. Clara took one last look in the mirror. The woman gazing back bore little resemblance to the frozen widow of a year ago. This woman's eyes held warmth and hope. Her face showed the gentle lines of someone who smiled often. This woman was loved and loving, chosen and choosing. The ride to town passed in a blur of Miriam's excited chatter and Sarah's gentle teasing. The small church was already filling when they arrived. It seemed half the territory had come to witness the marriage of the mysterious hired hand who'd become a hero and the widow who'd taught their children. But Clara had eyes only for the man standing at the altar. Elias wore a new black suit, his hair carefully combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression that stopped her heart, a look of wonder and gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was a man who'd never expected to find happiness again, witnessing a miracle he still couldn't quite believe. Reverend Mills, young and earnest, performed the simple ceremony. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, Miriam piped up with, "I object to how long this is taking," earning gentle laughter from the congregation. "Do you, Elias Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse?" As long as you both shall live. I do, Elias said, his voice strong and certain, with all that I am and all that I hope to be. And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara barely heard the rest, lost in Elias's dark eyes, in the small smile playing at his lips, in the solid warmth of his hands holding hers. I do, she whispered, then louder. I do, with joy and without reservation. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was tender, appropriate for the setting, but Clara felt in it all the passion and promise they'd share in private. The congregation erupted in cheers, none louder than Miriam's delighted, "Finally!" The celebration that followed filled the church hall with more merriment than it had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in town, their community's way of welcoming the Morgans officially into their midst. Old Sam Tucker played his fiddle while couples danced, and even Doc Morrison was convinced to take a turn around the floor. Clara found a quiet moment to step outside, needing air and a moment to absorb it all. She wasn't surprised when Elias found her there, standing in the shade of the church. Second thoughts. Mrs. Morgan, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Never, just marveling. A year ago, I couldn't imagine ever being warm again. Now look at us. He turned her in his arms, studying her face with the intensity that still made her breath catch. You saved us, you know, Miriam and me. We were just going through the motions of living until that night we knocked on your door. We saved each other, Clara corrected. That's what families do. Papa, Mama, Miriam came running around the corner. They're cutting the cake. Mrs. Turner says I can have the first piece since I'm the reason you got married. Is that so? Elias scooped his daughter up, making her giggle. And how do you figure that? Because if I hadn't gotten sick in the storm, we never would have stopped at Mama's house. So really, this whole wedding is thanks to me. Hard to argue with that logic, Clara said, kissing the girl's cheek. Come on then, wedding mastermind. Let's get you that cake. As they walked back inside together, Clara marveled at the rightness of it. 3 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness, building something new from the ashes of loss. The rest of the day passed in a happy blur. There were toasts and tears, laughter and music, as the sun began to sink low, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The newlyweds made their farewells. Miriam would stay with the Morrisons for 2 nights, the doctor's wife insisting that even practical marriages deserved a honeymoon of sorts. The ride home was quiet, charged with anticipation. When Elias lifted Clara down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist. Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan, he said softly. I've been home since the night you arrived, she replied. Now it's just official. Inside, the cabin felt different, fuller somehow, as if the ceremony had blessed what already existed. They stood in the main room, suddenly shy as new lovers despite the months of shared life. Clara, Elias began, but she silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the words they didn't need to say. When they broke apart, both breathless, she took his hand and led him to what was now their bedroom. Much later, as they lay entwined in the aftermath of finally expressing physically what had grown between them in heart and spirit. Elias traced lazy patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. No regrets? He asked quietly. Only one, she said, feeling him tense. That we didn't do this sooner. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Wanton woman, what will the good people of Mercy's Bend think? That we're happy, that we've earned it, that love can bloom even in the harshest ground if given half a chance. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I used to dream about Catherine. Every night, seeing the train, hearing the screams. I haven't had that dream in months. And I used to wake reaching for Thomas, only to remember he was gone. Now I wake reaching for you, and you're here. Always, he promised. No more running, no more secrets. Just this life we're building. Outside, a coyote called across the plains, answered by another. The sound that had once seemed lonely to Clara now spoke of connection, of creatures finding each other across the vast darkness. "Tell me about our future," she said. "What do you see?" "I see Miriam growing strong and smart, maybe becoming a teacher like her mama. I see us adding to our family if we're blessed. I see seasons turning and crops growing and neighbors helping neighbors. I see ordinary days and extraordinary love." He kissed her forehead. "I see everything I never thought I'd have again." "I see that too," Clara whispered, "and it's beautiful." They drifted to sleep as the moon rose full and bright, blessing their union with silver light. In the barn, the horses dozed. In town, people would long remember the wedding of Elias and Clara Morgan as the moment their community truly came together. And somewhere in Chicago, a corrupt man sat in prison, his empire destroyed by the courage of one man who chose justice over safety. But in the small cabin on the Wyoming plains, none of that mattered. There was only the quiet breathing of two people who'd found their way through grief to joy. The promise of a child's laughter come morning, and the vast, star-filled sky watching over them all. The next chapter of their lives had begun, written not in sorrow, but in hope. And like all the best stories, it was just the beginning. Thank you for listening to this tale of love and redemption on the frontier. If you're enjoying these stories from the Old West, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, romance, and adventure from America's frontier days. What did you think of Clara and Elias's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments.